Hello, this is Alex Pwndidi and welcome to my latest video. Today, we will go over the final table of my recent 25k WSOP victory, and this will be the fourth and final part of the series. If you have not watched the previous versions, please go ahead and do so. Since it's the final table, as I mentioned earlier, we will be going through every hand I get dealt and see maybe some hands that I fold, but you would think should be open or vice versa. This seems like a better way than only looking at the VPA bid hands. First hand, 8-7 offsuit, of course, we're not playing that. Ace deuce appears to be the first playable hand, and we are facing an open from the hijack. Now, looking at the stacks on the table, we can see that there are a bunch of very short stacks. We have an 8 blind stack, a bunch of 14 blind stacks, 2 18 blind stacks, and so on. My stack is right in the middle. I don't have as many blinds as the two chip leaders do, but I'm not on the low end either. So this is the type of stack size that has the most ICM pressure. Therefore, we should defend relatively tight, and a hand like ace deuce offsuit is just not going to make it into the defending range. Next up, we have pocket sevens. We are facing a jump from under the gun 1 for 7.7 blinds. Pocket sevens appear to be a profitable call here. I don't think we should be doing much jamming. We should mostly stick to calling our range here. As for how wide we can call, I don't think sevens are that high on our range. It should be close to the bottom of what we call. But let's have a look on HRC. One interesting thing to note is that he doesn't only have jumps, even though his under the gun 1 stack size is only 7.76. He actually gets to min raise with aces, kings, and then, of course, a bunch of raise folds as well, like ace 9 of ace 6 suited and so on. This is something that most people don't really do. Once they go to a certain stack size, they only have jumps. But yeah, this is not how it's supposed to work in theory. Having a min raise range, even at very low stack sizes, is just going to be optimal. Against the jamming range, which looks like this, so 5s plus, ace 10 plus, and then most suited aces and suited broadways. From the small blind, we get to, as I said, pretty much just call. We can see that we don't really 3-bet non-all-in, and we don't jam anything. We, continue as pure calling, and our range is 6 plus, ace 10 off, ace 10 suited. A pretty tight range, perhaps tighter than some of you might have thought. Folding hands like pocket 5s or king queen, king jack suited, ace 9 suited, and so on against an 8 big blind jam or 7.7 isn't very common. But yeah, in this case, his range is just too tight, and we have to be tight in response. If he doesn't have a min raising range and also jumps his ace king suited, kings, aces, then we should probably go slightly tighter as well. So yeah, as I said, sevens probably close to the bottom, but still a profitable call. One interesting thing would be to check what the big blind's response is after we call. So once we call these 7 blinds, the big blind doesn't really overcall almost anything. He has this part of his range, which he 3-bets non-all-in and basically clicks back. And then he has this range, which jumps. So we can see not even 10s can go for the big blind. Ace queen offsuit also a fold. So it's basically jacks plus, ace queen suited, ace king. Okay, so we call and we chop against sevens. Next we have pocket fours. I min raise from the cutoff. I think it's a pretty standard open. We get to call the big blind. The big blind defends, and we get this board, and I thought all our options are interesting here. Having a diamond gives our hand this equity boost needed where every option seems to be decent. Bet calling seems to be okay since our opponent will be jamming a bunch of straight draws, flush draws, maybe even some deuce X. Bet folding, again, also seems like a reasonable option since obviously our opponent will jam a lot of better hands as well. C-bet jamming is perhaps the least attractive option, but I can also see merit in that, especially with a diamond. So yeah, I thought this was a pretty complicated spotting game. I wasn't sure what the best action was. So I thought I'd stick to the most default one, which would be to just bet small, and then when facing a jam, just let it go. I ran this hand on PioSolver with ICM, and yeah, let's have a look at what's supposed to happen. Before looking at that, one thing that I wanted to mention was how tight the big blind is supposed to defend here. I ran this spot on HRC, and let me just show you the results. Okay, so the cutoff's opening range is supposed to look like that, around 40%. Seems reasonable, quite close to what I would be opening in game. The big blind gets to jam basically all pairs and most offsuit ace-X. And this is his calling range. So as I said, this looks very, very tight. Folding hands like 9-8, Jack-8, even like these low kings, Queen-7, these suited hands, of course. So yeah, a very, very tight defending range. So what I did for the PioSim was first I ran it with this range, and then I also ran it with a range that I thought would be closer to how my opponent would be playing. So yeah, first let's jump into the sim with the GTO HRC range. Okay, so first, as I said, this is with HRC ranges. Given how tight this defending range is, it actually gets to open jam or donk jam a fair amount. The type of hand that it wants to open jam would be some of the weakest King X, but need the most protection, and then a bunch of the strongest flush draws and straight draws. Facing a check, this is how our strategy is supposed to look like. So first, our C-bet jams, which would again be weakest kings, strongest 10x, straight draws, and then this interesting category of the low ace-X with a diamond. Well, not ace-deuce, but like these ones. Ace-3, we can see with a diamond, pretty much pure jumps. Ace-4, ace-5, kind of the same. So these are very nice hands to find. They have a lot of equity. Well, not a lot, but decent equity when called. And need the most protection. So as for our hand, Pocket Force with a diamond and without the spade appear to want to do whatever they want. So whether we bet small or we check is fine. Jamming or betting big, definitely suboptimal. So once we bet small, our opponent is supposed to react like this, jam a bunch, even have some non-only raises, but yeah, I guess doesn't really matter. And against the jam, we just fold, but we can see the EV is basically the same between calling or folding. So what this sim shows is that, yeah, we shouldn't really be betting big or jamming with Pocket Force on the flop. And whether we check or bet small, both perfectly fine options. And if we bet small, we can call the jam or fold the jam. Again, both decent options, depends on how we think our opponent is responding. For example, we saw that our opponent is supposed to fold a lot of deuce X preflop. So then in this case, he doesn't have a lot of deuce X to jam, which makes Pocket Force slightly worse for us. Now let's compare with the sim where our opponent defends a more, I guess, realistic range, which is wider than this one. Okay, so we can see that now our opponent doesn't get to have any donks at all. His range will be much weaker, lower equity, so yeah, he just pure checks his range. Another thing that changed is that given how weak our opponent's range is now, we don't really get to c-bet jam anything either. We just much prefer to play this min raise strategy, or min bet strategy, as it will be super effective against our opponent's extremely wide range. Now, these low pocket pairs have also become pure bets as the need for protection is much higher. So once we bet small, the response is like this. Again, we can see some deuce X jumps, mostly the ones with diamonds, and the ones without primarily continue by calling. Against this strategy, pocket fours, again, extremely break even. So if we think our opponent is jamming a bit more deuce X, then jamming or calling makes sense. But then there's also the issue of 10x, which is true calling, and some people might jam that. So yeah, again, in this sim as well, we can get the same outcome, but betting small is fine on the flop, and then we can do whatever the decision, doesn't really matter much. Okay, next up, we have pocket fours. Yeah, not gonna be opening this hand. We have 3 jamming stacks and then 2 bigger stacks behind. Pocket fours is a bit too wide for us to open in this spot. Queen 10 suited. Yeah, of course, facing a jam and a call, we don't really have anything to do with it anymore. Get it in one time, misclick. Then we have 4-5 suited on the small blind. And I thought our strategy from the small blind is quite interesting in this spot. So yes, we do cover the big blind, but at the same time, our stacks are pretty close, so it's not like we can comfortably stack off against him and do whatever we want. So I thought we want to play a very mixed strategy that looks close to chippy V. This is usually how this spot works. 4-5 suited, I thought would work quite well as a raise. Let's see what simple preflop has to say about my thought process. And here it is. So green is call, and then this orange color is raise 3.5x. I didn't give more options. I think these 2 are enough. So this does look indeed very, very similar to chippy V. One difference being that we don't really get to fold much. We only fold 3%. So we get to VPIP quite a bit wider than in chippy V. As for the raising portion, though, yeah, this just looks very similar to a chippy V scenario. We get to raise a bunch of our weakest suited stuff, some offsuit middle range stuff, and then, of course, a very big portion of the top of our range. So, yeah, nothing too special here. 4-5 suited can limp or raise, both options perfectly fine. We can check the responses. So after we limp, the big blind gets to ISO only 21%. So this is a very big difference between chippy V and ICM. Here we can see it's only at 21% ISO, whereas in chippy V it would be closer to 40-45%. So yeah, just a much lower frequency of the garbage type of stuff we're supposed to ISO blind versus blind. You can see a lot of the strong stuff are still there, but a lot of the weak stuff are missing. Now, as for the big blind's response when we raise from the small blind, it looks like this. So mostly continuing by calling, not really doing much non-all-in 3-betting. This is the orange color. So we can see we 3-bet non-all-in with aces, ace-king suited, and then some ace-deuce, ace-3, ace-6 offsuit. And then this red color is the jamming. So we get to jam ace-queen, ace-king, ace-queen suited, and also some of those offsuit weak aces. These usually perform really, really well as jams in these blind versus blind scenarios, because first, they have a blocker, which is really important, having the ace. And second, the deuce or the 3 or the 4, this type of cards don't really block our opponents or so the small blinds raise folding range. If we look at the small blinds range, it doesn't raise a lot of deuce X, 3x, or 4x. Yes, there is some, of course, but most of them are going to be higher cards that raise. So jamming these low ones performs very well because of that. And then, of course, even in the most simplistic thought process, in that we jam ace deuce and our opponent is folding ace 3, ace 4, ace 5, ace 6, ace 7, ace 8, ace 9, and so on. As for how wide we're supposed to call the jam from the small blind, looks like this. So ace plus ace queen.